Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. I am here with Dr. Murray McCormick, our venerable Leader Post football writer. And Murray is under the weather today, but there's no way he is going to take a vet day on this Tuesday. That's how dedicated he is. Rough Riders. I don't even know where to start anymore.
I think you nailed it.
Except to say that they're finished. It's over, but they have one game left.
I think it's interesting to look back, but I think you nailed it with the vet day. I think that kind of started off last week. It was last week that we got a vet day. We went to practice. A beautiful day. Cody's not practicing. Mason Fine's running with the first team offense, and we're all looking at each other, going like, "This doesn't make any sense. None of this made any sense." It's still, even after the fact, it doesn't make sense to me that what Craig Dickinson did by swapping Cody for Fine, and in the long run, it didn't make any difference. I don't think they would have beaten the Stampeders with Cody behind the under center anyway. But it just turned out to be a strange week, summed up with a vet day for your number one quarterback in preparation for arguably the biggest game of the year. And I don't know, just they're done. They're done, and we still got another week to go through to kind of file great stories on what's ahead and what's behind for these riders. And it's not the way we envisioned things way back when we've had our first Rider Rumblings broadcast this season. And frankly, I'm still kind of surprised that it's turned out this way, even though it's been a long, slow grind to where we are right now, Rob.
Yeah, the long goodbye to the 2022 Saskatchewan Roughriders. And it's felt this way since, wow. I mean, it's 2 wins in the last 12 games. There's just been a pall cast over the franchise since, well, July 8th. The last game they won at home, they couldn't even win it in a manner that was worthy of celebration because of the whole Garrett Marino mess. And maybe the high point and the low point of the season were both the same evening, July 8th, when you look at it. And for them to lose 6 home games in a row in a year that is to culminate with a Grey Cup in Regina is, well, it's pretty disappointing to say the least.
Could you imagine, with any coach other than Craig Dickinson? No, because Craig Dickinson has remained the same through the whole thing. And I know there's lots of talk about his future and what's happened, but he's remained cooperative, he's remained friendly, he's remained true to himself. And I just kind of wonder if you've gone through any other coaches, like, it doesn't feel like they've lost 6 in a row. You've gone to practice expecting to see this Paul, to see, oh no, woe was me. There's none of that really. And I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. But Craig has kind of steered us through this mess of a season with kind of an optimistic viewpoint. The next game things are going to change, and some people dislike that kind of, but it's been kind of, I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but I'm trying to think of the word that describes it. Craig Dickinson has kept us on.
It's professional.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good word, Rob. Good for you.
I was thinking the other night about the other really, really bad rider teams that I've covered, where it seems like the bottom has fallen out completely. And the first one of that description was 1999. And I remember one day in the dressing room, I was doing an interview, and from the corner of the room, it was a bunch of offensive linemen, and they were catcalling and heckling and saying all these terrible things about me, probably accurately. And I'm trying to do an interview for a feature, and which was actually to run in the Rough Riders game program. So they were totally destroying an interview that was being conducted solely for the purposes of the Rough Riders. And just the way that team, conducted itself at times really made me wonder about the general character of the whole group. 2011, that was a pretty ugly last few weeks. When the wheels fell off that season, they won their first 3 games under Ken Miller, and then basically couldn't score a touchdown on offense after that, and that had its ugly and awkward moments. 2015, the first game of the year, the Rough Riders lost to Winnipeg, and Corey Chamberlain was snapping at you in a post-game press conference. And by the end of the year, I had players yelling at me, calling me a jerk. And again, I can't really dispute what they said just on the basis of factuality. But there's been none of that this year. And if that is to happen, fine, it comes with the territory. But this group has been far more professional while bottoming out than other bad editions of the Rough Riders that I can recall.
I think partially that it's because we don't get access to the locker room either. So we don't really have an opportunity for players to one-on-one with us to express their displeasure. I think when they released, when Garrett Marino talked to the media the first time and the players are lined up behind him, Mike Edem and those guys, I think that was the first sign we saw that was us versus them. And then when he was ultimately released and the way the players reacted towards the media was another sign. That's the only uncomfortable time I can remember of dealing with it, even with, and as I said, people, that's part of the biz, folks. We understand, Rob and I understand that better than anybody. We understand there come compliments, there also comes confrontations. And that's what we've kind of rambled a little. We've missed the opportunity to settle those confrontations, regardless of what we've written, because we don't have access to them one-on-one. We can't go up to a guy like, let's say Mike Edem and I have had a disagreement or something. I can't go up to him and say, let's sort this out right now, and then move on like professionals. We haven't had that opportunity. So that's kind of the access. I'm not quite sure why I'm on this rambling rant, but it's just part of the life. But there's been a professionalism about this team that comes down from the head coach, and I think it's a quarterback too. We've enjoyed dealing with Cody Fajardo. He's always been he's criticized for it, and sometimes you wonder. I still remember asking him about his knee and him explaining what's wrong with his knee. I still think that was an interesting thing, and how sensitive he is and stuff like that. So maybe that's a part of the team, but in the big picture, it doesn't mean a darn thing, because here it is. We're going to be going to November. I'm not even sure I'm going to have to break out my winter parka during football season, unless we get to the Grey Cup and we're outdoors often. But it's going to be a weird November without the Riders in the playoffs, and it's just I think it's just going to be different, won't it, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's not without precedent by any means, but it's been since 2016 since they haven't made the playoffs. And 2015 they didn't make the playoffs. 2014 they did, but it was a token playoff game because as soon as Darian Durant got hurt, that season went completely haywire. So there was a stretch of 3 years where it was in the playoffs but hopeless, and then 2 years out of the playoffs. So it's not like this team has been a dynasty, but it seemed that the trajectory of this franchise had changed, and then they go from 4-1 to 6-11, and it doesn't matter whether they finish 7-11 or 6-12 right now. And this weekend's game is meaningless. What is going to be interesting is what happens in the days and weeks after that. What do you envision?
I envision there's going to be, as I said the other day, consequences. I think there are some people who are going to lose their jobs. I would be kind of surprised if Jason Moz is back. I think Steve Sorrell's the offensive line coach. I think he's going to be showing his way out the door. And man, I'm kind of like you. I bounce back and forth between O'Day and Dickinson. Like, I think O'Day's the ultimate. Well, Craig Reynolds is the ultimate responsibility for what happens with the Rough Riders. Jeremy O'Day's the ultimate responsibility for what happens with football ops. And the team was let down this year. He didn't get the numbers. Didn't rebuild the offensive line the way it should. In defense of that, there weren't a whole lot of free agent offensive linemen out there for him to change the whole attitude of this team.
But you don't have to do it via free agency. Go find somebody.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
That's why you have scouts. That's why you have personnel people.
But who would believe that Ty Rogers came in and was an absolute bust for 9 games, and I think he still leads the team in terms of penalties in that area.
Jamal Campbell was signed, and that was a failure of a deal. And those were the 2 major additions to the offensive line during the offseason. And that's where I keep kind of going back and forth too, Murr. It's like, I think there's times I think, well, the maybe from some perspectives, the real layup here is for them to fire the head coach, because that's generally what happens after a season like this. But I keep mitigating that is, I think Craig Dickinson was put in a no-win situation, and guess what? There were no wins at home after July 8th. And how do you blame Craig Dickinson for being dealt a really bad hand? So then that blame, I think, gets shifted to Jeremy O'Day, but I'm not sure that there's grounds to fire the general manager either. I think firing the head coach is too easy an out, and I don't think it addresses the meat of what went wrong with this football team. But I'm not sure that that Jeremy O'Day, on the basis of 12 games that in which they only won 2, is deserving of losing his job, especially when you consider that before that skid, Craig Dickinson and Jeremy O'Day were on a 26-9 run. So did they suddenly become incompetent after July 8th? No, I think there's a greater body of work, and I'm retracing what I wrote last week. I think there's a greater body of work that supports the retention of both men, as opposed to the discontinuation of their association with the Roughriders. You are muted.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry for
that. Was the most insightful thing you've said in years.
Geez, I wish I knew what I said too. I'd repeat myself.
We need subtitles for that one.
Yeah. Don't make me laugh.
What was that? Was that really profound? What did I miss?
I'm saying Craig Dickinson isn't blameless in this whole mess. We have the lack of discipline on this team. There were issues. There's a Duke Williams thing on the sideline that I know Craig wouldn't condone, but it happened. There was a Gary Johnson suspension. There's the Jake Dalagala suspension for
but how do you blame Craig Dickinson for the latter two situations?
But it happens under his watch. There's all the penalties.
But they're not within the. They're not even within the umbrella of the team at that point.
Well, I know
they weren't even on the facility at that point. How do you blame Craig Dickinson for something that happened externally?
Well, they're under his watch, and I guess it's just part of the culture.
Are they under his watch when someone is driving a car?
I mean, that's a good point. Maybe I'm being okay. I'll go back to just the penalties and the and what happens on the field is partially his responsibility. I think the penalties were, mind you, and they've cleaned them up a little lately, haven't they? There haven't been as many penalties as we've been.
Yeah, not that it's really done much good. They've shown that they can lose while racking up the penalties and while generally eschewing them.
And the number of sacks too, which isn't on him either. But I think we would like Craig to stick around. I think I'll scramble my way back to this, because he's so easy to deal with and whatnot. But, Rob, I think he's going to be the consequence. I think it's just going to be the easy way out is going to be to let Craig Dickinson go, and who's probably going to be picked up as a special teams coordinator by another team very quickly.
Yeah, Craig Dickinson will be, if he is unemployed, it will be for about as long as the duration of this podcast, if not less time, given the respect that he commands around the Canadian Football League. I'm not so sure. I get the feeling that I go back to 2011 after that season, and what seemed like the really easy decision: fire Brendan Taman. That was what a lot of people were clamoring for. That team did seem to be devoid of talent, devoid of hope. They'd had a miserable ending to the season after a bit of a surge around mid-season, and I was sure that Brendan Taman was going to be let go. Jim Hopson made the tough decision, the unpopular decision. He kept Brendan Taman. Now, they were finding a new head coach because Ken Miller stepped down after that season. So it's not like the football operations side was without a major change. But the layup at that point seemed to be to let Brendan Taman go. That isn't what happened. Given another chance, he rebuilt the offensive line. There was only one starter held over from 2011 into 2012, and established a foundation for a team that won the Grey Cup in 2013.
Yeah.
So if you look at that precedent, and granted it wasn't Craig Reynolds making that decision, but can you not just say, look, just put the onus on somebody to do a better job, as opposed to finding a different somebody, talk to that somebody internally, impress upon them, as if they need to hear it, the urgency of the situation, and let's see if they can do a better job the next year. Players have bad years and then good years. I write bad columns and then columns that aren't quite as bad. So there's I think I'm just not sure that this 12 games is cause for a major purge. Maybe we've seen it already with Cody Fajardo. Maybe that's the scapegoat that I think some people were lobbying for. If they can repair the quarterbacking situation quite visibly, if they can put some offensive linemen in front of that quarterback quite visibly, does that not address what a lot of people identified as the problems?
I think so. I don't think Cody's coming back though. Do you
Oh,
think
he's not coming back.
especially and if they stay with your stay with the status quo, that's for sure he's not coming back. But which is too
Why would he
bad.
want to come back here after
I
the
don't
way
know.
he's been treated here?
I know he was embarrassed, and for a guy that's been that frank. Then it's social media's reaction too was kind of heartless to see that this guy who's poured his heart out, and you and I have both pointed out how important he has been in the community and how he's done everything he can. He's played on a wounded knee all season and did everything he could. He just didn't have an offensive line in front of him, and that's kind of the bottom line. Well, he did have some of his issues with passing and whatnot, and having happy feet. But man, wouldn't you have happy feet behind that offensive line? Man, you and I'd be running. Well, I'd be walking very quickly for my life, but it just would be.
Earlier this year, I heard commentators say that Joe Burrow had happy feet behind the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. That Matt Ryan had them behind the Indianapolis Colts offensive line. These are two quarterbacks who've played in a Super Bowl. Look how Tom Brady is doing all of a sudden without the same support system around him that was once there. Again, I go back to 2011. Darian Durant looked like a very ordinary quarterback that year. He threw 16 touchdown passes. Guess how many touchdown passes Cody Fajardo threw this year? 16. Yeah. The offensive line was a mess. Not the mess that it is now, but still quite a mess. And the offense was virtually non-existent. Suddenly, they draft Ben Heenan, and they're going to have a high draft pick again next year. They signed Dominic Picard, signed Brendan Labatt, and trade for Xavier Fulton from Edmonton. And suddenly the offensive line, which goes from a porous quintet, is very good. And the next year, it's virtually impenetrable. So it was so good that Dan Clark was a backup.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think I think Cody Fajardo, and I've said this so many times, I think his performance was symptomatic of what the misfortunes that befell the Saskatchewan Roughriders, as opposed to being the catalyst for them.
How do you think he'll be remembered, Rob, for this franchise?
I hope that history is kinder to him than people have been in these last few weeks, even the last 2 years.
Last week, yeah.
Last week even. I think people have to remember the amazing things he did for fans, and continue to do. Even last Saturday, I wrote about it in my column that went up Tuesday morning. I mean, after the game on Tuesday, Saturday, he had every justification for just staying in the dressing room, not wanting to come out after the game to sign autographs for fans. But he was out there posing for selfies and smiling and signing everything. And it must have been an awful day for him. Yeah. But I think he allowed some people to really have a nice day because of his general good nature. And I hope that is what people remember. I hope they remember 2019 and the magic that he created that year. And I hope they remember that there aren't many quarterbacks in my lifetime that have quarterbacked a team to first place, a Rough Rider team in the West Division. I can name them: Ron Lancaster, Darian Durant, and Cody Fajardo.
Rob,
it's a pretty short list.
We talk about the offense all the time. Something's gone on with that defense too. Like Calgary ran through them like a knife through butter on that game. They couldn't stop. Mills was amazing. That he's just a bull. And then
what a violent runner!
What just mean like? And I know a good thing that Mike Adams okay and everything, but what a violent hit he hit on when those two met a collision. That's old time football. Clean hit, nothing wrong with it. Just the outcome was sad, but Mike Edom was okay now.
Well, what does that say about Mike Edom, though? I mean, it's the latter stages of a game that clearly the Riders aren't going to win. There's clearly a size mismatch. It would have been easy for Mike Edom just to make a career-based move and maybe not put himself in the path of Mills. And what did he do? He took on this running back who's significantly bigger. And look at the result. But that's professionalism. If more players in that game had played with the determination exhibited by Mike Edom, and if more players, I think, over the course of the season had emulated that, maybe we'd be having a different conversation today. And that's I keep hearing that these guys are working hard and it's a good group and everything. Well, everything I see on the field, not everything, but a lot of things I see on the field are not reflective of the spin that's emanating from Riderville.
And that's making me wonder what we're going to see on come Saturday in Calgary against the Stampeders.
I think I should go see the Pats game that night.
I know I'm going to think of like
Everett Silvertips are here. It's really enticing.
Well, we call them professionals, and they're still getting paid to play a game. Like there's a big point of that. That's still money on the line for their games, and there's no playoff bonuses this year, which is, I think we talk about the playoff. The fans want the playoffs because it adds more excitement for the players. They also like the playoffs because they get a little extra money, and we know
it's not like they're millionaires in the first place, so that coin comes in handy.
So I always wonder about that, and I haven't had to cover. We've covered meaningless games, but meaningless games with a playoff game in the future. So we've had a couple
like last year in Hamilton, for example.
It didn't mean anything, but they were setting the table for what's ahead. So I wonder how they approach this. Going, do I play so I don't get hurt, so I don't have my whole off season ruined with an injury? Or do I play as hard as I have? Because if you don't play as hard as you have, you're going to get hurt. So there's that bottom line. And football players know that you've got to play the game the way it is. You've got to, once you step on the field, I think they have to put their minds to it that this game is their game, their last game. It's an audition tape. It's a pride thing. And I think, but am I going to see that from the Riders? I don't think we saw a lot of that in the second half on Saturday. I think that when they went ahead on that touchdown, things looked good. And then the Stampeders just ran the life out of the Roughriders.
And when I was watching that, I was reminded of an old Jack Gotta quote from 1985. As the Stampeders ran and ran and ran the ball right up the guts of the Rider defense, which really didn't seem too interested in efforts such as Mike Adams notwithstanding, providing any resistance. And the Jack Gotta quote was, after a particularly exasperating loss, they weren't exactly a bunch of hungry dogs chasing a meatball, were they? And that's what I took out of watching the Rough Riders during the second half of that game.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have expected that because they still had an opportunity to make the playoffs. That collapse was so unusual, not unusual, but surprising considering what happened there.
I mean, they haven't been able to stop the run. It happened. Yeah. It happened against Hamilton in that crucial loss when Hamilton chewed up half the fourth quarter going into the wind, and then once it was almost the same script in the second half against Calgary, and that goes back to the Garrett Marino meltdown and the consequent release after some other questionable hits. And then Anthony Lanier II being injured. And suddenly you go from a pair of defensive tackles that's tremendous to who's playing defensive tackle this week.
Exactly, yeah.
And suddenly AC Leonard isn't as effective, and Pete Robertson isn't as effective, and the whole defense isn't as effective. And having the interior of the defensive line gutted like that, and maybe it's too much to ask to say, okay, Jeremy O'Day, okay, Paul Jones, you've got to find players who can be the next man up. But that's their job, and there wasn't a next man up after Garrett Marino, nor was there one after Anthony Lanier II.
I think we have to give credit to the linebacking trio, still playing hard and still playing, but they're going to end up. I think Larry Dean and Darnell Sankey going to end up with probably over 200 combined tackles, which says something about how many. Your linebackers should get a lot of tackles, but that's a sign. I think of the defensive line wasn't really stopping the run, and that's it. Darnell Sankey was a great signing. I think we can both agree to that one. That where would they be without him? Where would they be without Derek Moncrief? And
they'd probably be out of the playoffs.
Probably be out of the playoffs.
Probably doesn't make much of a difference.
And I know, and we mentioned Larry Dean coming back from a torn Achilles tendon. Still was a stud out there. So the linebackers are good. The defensive backs, hot and cold. I think there seemed to be
Nick Marshall's the only one who made plays. Aside from that, there's an allergy to interceptions.
Milligan was pretty good. He was a hard hitter back there.
But again, there's just not an abundance of interceptions. After Nick Marshall, there's nobody in the secondary who's going to make an interception. So there's just, again, not a lot of hungry dogs chasing a meatball. But if you look at the linebackers, I think you can use that as a justification for giving Jeremy O'Day some praise for what he did this year. Mario Alford with 4 return touchdowns, the first Rough Rider ever to do that in a season, and the first Rough Rider to ever have a kick return for a touchdown in 3 different ways. So that was a larcenous deal with the Montreal Alouettes. And the Rough Riders did a great, really ingenious thing by letting Chandler Worthy return 2 kickoffs for
Yeah.
touchdowns against them, because that was what rendered Mario Alford expendable.
Yeah.
So they ultimately won that. Even though they gave up the 2 touchdowns to Chandler Worthy, they got 4 return touchdowns out of Mario Alford. So they were +2 as a result of that.
There's not a lot of cheering in the press box, but there was cheering on Saturday night when we were watching that play, because it was so spectacular. It was just one of those plays that reminds you why you love football, to see what he did for one guy with willing himself to return a 104-yard punt for a touchdown.
There were 6 Stampeders that had a legitimate shot at him and didn't either didn't touch him or didn't make the tackle.
6th round pick.
At that stage of the game, I think there are a lot of players who were just running out of bounds.
Yeah.
Mario Alford just kept going and going and going, and the players who were on special teams with him obviously wanted him to get that touchdown as well, and they weren't mailing it in on that final play. But then Rough Riders got the ball back, and that offensive line did what that offensive line does.
Yes.
And
I think there are 5
I've gone more often on this podcast this year than any other year preceding.
I'm not sure it was 4 or 5 sacks after that part, but back even towards the end of the game when they had back-to-back sacks, when the game was out of reach and Mason Fine was trying to get something going, and then with 16 seconds left to go, Craig Dixon takes a knee, which raised some controversy. Some people talking about that. I didn't think anything of it. Darn right, you take a knee, you're not going to win this game. And then he explained himself very well, saying doesn't want anybody to get hurt. He would be sickened if someone got hurt on a stupid play, wasted play at the end of the game, just to appease the few fans that were still there booing what had taken place. So,
well, look what happened with Mike Adam. I mean, what if something like that had happened on a completely meaningless play? How would anybody feel? What a waste of time that would have been. So there wasn't a great likelihood that on one play somebody was going to get hurt, but I don't know. The optics of it were terrible, and I had a little fun with it in my column because it just seemed to symbolize a lot of what's gone wrong with this football team, just the sheer futility that we've been witnessing. But if you take a step back and look at it rationally, and you consider that there's absolutely nothing to gain and there's only something to lose by running that play. And remember, it was 3rd and 23 too. It's not like they had a yard or two to go. I mean, what you were going to have was the ball in the air for a considerable period of time, and perhaps a chance to take a shot at a receiver who's jumping for a ball, because there could have been a receiver hung out to dry in that situation. It wasn't like they could run a quick, safe play. That wouldn't have been at their disposal at all. So I think the element of risk was increased due to the nature of the predicament the Rough Riders were in at that point.
So Rob, I was laying in bed this morning, as I usually do in my mornings, thinking, Mason Fine, Jake Dalagala, who is the future of the Riders next year? Are either one of them back?
No, I don't think either one's the future of the team.
No.
I didn't see anything out of Mason Fine that made me think that there was some fireworks to be let off. I think he's certainly worth bringing back, and he has a year remaining on his contract. I liked the composure he showed. I thought the pass that he threw to Jack Evans for the touchdown, standing in there in the teeth of a blitz and making the throw, that was something we haven't seen a lot this year. We haven't seen that kind of ability to stand steadfastly in the pocket, and I generally liked what I saw out of him. But then again, you look at the numbers, and it's not the kind of production that's dissimilar from that we've been witnessing all year. So
it wasn't a
Jake
spark.
Dolagala's got a great arm. I would love to see it this weekend in Calgary. If they want to extract anything out of this game, let's see what Jake Dolagala with those arm skills can do. That's about all that they can really do constructively this weekend, is use it as a barometer for next year. And if you're with Cody Fajardo clearly out of the picture, if you're not going to use this weekend's game to evaluate the quarterbacks, why even get on the plane?
Mm-hmm. So they could go into, let's say, the off season without a GM, without a head coach, without a starting quarterback, without 2 dominant offensive linemen, struggles on the defensive line. Like, this off season could be chaotic amongst many, many more, but boy, it's going to be wild. We're looking to see what these guys are going to do. And I'm not 100% sure, and I meant to check that before I chat on this, what they're allowed to do between the end of the season and during the playoff window, if they're allowed to fire a head coach and
I think
replace.
they can do what they want until Grey Cup week, can't
Yeah,
they?
I
I think
think
the
that
blackout begins maybe the Tuesday of Grey Cup
maybe
week.
because it
So
seems you can't
thanks
say
to their early elimination, I think they bought themselves a couple of weeks time, and
unless
they've got to do something before Grey Cup week. They don't want that hovering over the entire festival. That would
but
just compound what's gone wrong this season.
what happens if they want a guy from a Grey Cup from playoff team though? How do they juggle that sort of? Unless
Well,
they just sort of
you've
say,
got to clear the spot first,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's the first order of business. I don't think you can leave people hanging either. If you're going to retain people, and if not, indicate what direction you're going to go, and then hope for a Grey Cup festival that is just so joyous that a lot of this is forgotten or at least shelved for a while.
I think it's going to be. I'm kind of looking for it. I like the. It's not. I like the whole setup of having everything at Wheel District except for the Spirit of Edmonton down at the Connexus Center. I think what have I seen the stuff I've looked at it. They've had enough time to plan for the Grey Cup, haven't they? Can
Yeah,
you think back to 3 years?
and the Riders have had enough time to plan for what they plan to do with the front office after this season, because it's not like it's been touch and go as far as making the playoffs, and it's not like okay, if they can win this game, they're in, and people's jobs are saved, and they lose, oh gee, what a shock, they're out of it. It didn't really come down to that. It was just sort of this gradual erosion, but it's been evident for several weeks now where this is going. And after the Hamilton game, it became improbable. So I think the Craig Reynolds and the board should have a pretty clear idea even before opening kickoff on Saturday where this is going to land. And if they don't, it's on them, because they've certainly had enough notice. This has been 3.5 months of ugliness.
The long, slow goodbye is a perfect description of what's been going on here. And I think you aptly nailed that one. Rob, I know I'm going to throw this out. You don't like to do it with you, but the Regina Thunder had an amazing weekend, an amazing Sunday. I've seen the pictures and I've seen your story. The huge snowstorm hits. The game is, from what I can understand, might have been in jeopardy. And what do? They run out their fans, kids, a couple of players, parents, with their shovels
with a snowblower,
and they cleaned off the field so they could play a game. What is? And I'm not saying it's a Saskatchewan moment that we're all going to embrace. I'm thinking any team, any place in Canada probably would have done the same thing. But what gives you kind of the tingles to see that people are that kind of supportive of a team? And then I will let you go and let you not bearing the lead to say what happened after that field was cleaned and what that Thunder running back did. And
Ryland Leichert proceeded to emulate the snowblower that Scott McCauley had been pushing on the field. 390 yards on 52 carries.
Amazing.
And
they had 66 plays. 66 plays.
And he was carried the ball on 52. They completed 4 passes all day. They only tried 9. And this is Carter Shuchuk, the Prairie Football Conference's top quarterback. And Ryland Leichert, 390 yards. The most ever in Canadian junior football, other than Andrew Harris with 410 in a Canadian Bowl in 2008. And we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that an epic matchup is brewing, because on Sunday at 1 p.m., the Saskatoon Hilltops are here. And honestly, put the Hilltops in a must-win situation. And even though the Thunder's 8-0 and the Hilltops has lost three times this year for the first time under Tom Sargent as the head coach, and I believe he's been the head coach since 1998.
Yeah.
It's the first time they've lost as many as 3 games since 1993. I don't think it'd be shocking if the Hilltops were to come in here and win. They did it last year. They won 29-9 on November 14th after the Hilltops had lost twice to the Thunder during the regular season. So let's hope they're not snowblowing Taylor Field this weekend. Pardon me, no Mosaic Stadium this weekend. I presume there's a better handle on field cleaning and scraping, but that's going to be something. Football is not done at Mosaic Stadium this year, even if you remember that there's the Grey Cup, of course, but there's high school football. Thursday night, the City 5A Championship is being held, Sheldon versus Greenall. Then the 6A semifinals are being held Friday night, and then the following Friday, the 6A City Final is being held. Plus, the University of Regina Rams, who have clinched the home playoff game for November 5th, which you are covering, are playing the University of Manitoba Bisons on Saturday at 2 p.m. So there's tons of football to watch locally. Just doesn't happen to involve the most storied uh, football franchise based in Regina.
I just want to throw a quick little perspective about Ryland's day. His first run was for 18 yards, and then he didn't have another run. His longest run of the day was 30 yards. Most of them were just 7 to 8 yard, 9 yard runs. They just sort of piled up the yardage on him. So it wasn't like sometimes when you see like the guy hit 390 yards, there's a couple of a 100 yard run in there that kind of helps out the total. His was just grinded out offensive line, the fullback did his job, just a good old fashioned running downhill all day. And I think your lead said it best. Once the snow stopped, he started to run, and it was just a great game.
The offensive coordinator Stefan Ensign, he loves to throw the football.
Yes,
and they've got 3 of the top 4 receivers in the Prairie Football Conference: Isaiah Woodley, and Isaac Ford, and Ryland Sokol. And so Winnipeg was much more apt to throw the ball. It wasn't like throwing the ball was impossible. It was the conditions were prohibitive. But to talk about adapting to the circumstances, that's what Stefan Ensign and the Thunder were able to do. And then you look at what's really interesting about this matchup this weekend is in comes Saskatoon with Boston Davidson, the league's leading rusher. And the Thunder has someone who's just rushed for 390 yards, and it was Boston Davidson who ran all over the Regina Thunder last year in the league final. So it's really going to be an interesting game on Sunday. And I'll need that after the Broncos play Jacksonville in the morning, because that's going to be depressing.
And they're in London too, aren't they? That's it.
They would be well advised to stay there.
I'm still dealing with my Steelers. One day. Well, I think we have a little more optimism than your Broncos right now, because we have a quarterback and another great receiver. But I'm still scratching my head why even talk would be out there of trading Chase Claypool for anything. I think you don't get rid of Chase Claypool, but that's a whole other league and a whole other world.
And my fantasy team is 0-7, so everywhere I go, there's football futility in terms of the pro ranks. If it's the Roughriders, check. If it's the Denver Broncos, check. If it's my fantasy team with Jared Goff getting me -3 points playing quarterback this weekend, check. I'm going to cut him as we speak. So,
I'm a solid 48th in the green zone fantasy football pool. So, woohoo for me, probably 70 people. Well,
yeah, Jared Goff. Ugh. Anyway, once we get down to that, I know it's time to go.
Yes.
Do you want to sing a song or tell a joke? Or
I just want, if anybody send me, what do I do to end this cold? I have to be perfectly honest. I'm testing myself regularly, and I don't have COVID. I just have this cold that doesn't want to leave. So hopefully just keep your distance from me.
So, 2 little things, little tags at the end. Stay away from Murray McCormick. By the way, happy anniversary to Murray and Marion McCormick. 40th anniversary.
40 years
this past Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Time flies when you're having fun. That's for absolutely sure.
And I should have this memorized by now. Yes. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And Murray, go to wherever you get your cold medication. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob, that's me, at rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Vanstone. And don't follow Murray in person because he is a walking germ. But on Twitter, he can be found at MurrayLP. Did I say that okay?
That was perfect. I actually have Stitcher listed on all my things in my radio. So I see Stitcher all the time. Still have no idea what it is, but it's on my car radio.
Well, you've had 2 hip replacements, so you've seen the Stitcher a few times.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
What an incredibly funny way to end this podcast. Yes. For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone, and despite that joke, we hope you will join us again next week. Oh, what an interesting edition that will be. Take care and have a great day.